Greetings, everyone. I will now read a story from my short story anthology, The Human Equation. This one is entitled A Brother's Lament. I'll never forget that evening. Although it happened over 5 years ago, the memory of it is still remarkably vivid. It was 2:00 in the morning, New York time. I was deep in the peaceful abyss of sleep. Suddenly, I was jarred awake by the telephone. I picked up the receiver in a state of extreme agitation, with sleep still clouding my senses. "Hello, David, is that you?" "Yes," I replied. There was something about the sound of that voice that seemed familiar to me, but I was not alert enough to discriminate that well. "Who is this?" I asked. "It's me, Charlie." "Charlie? What's up? What's the matter? Do you realize it's 2:00 in the morning?" "Come on, David. Is that the way to talk to me? I haven't heard from you in ages. Besides, I've something very important to tell you." Although my brother and I were never that close, I could tell that something was wrong. I needed to pay attention. What's the matter?" I asked. "I really can't tell you over the phone," he answered. "You'll have to come out and see me." I wanted to protest. I wanted to make excuses. I really didn't want to go, but I knew that I had no real choice given such inexplicable behavior. "All right," I said. "I'll see if I can get plane tickets for Saturday. I'll call you when I have the flight information. Okay?" "All right," I heard him say. "I'll be expecting you." His voice sounded disturbingly weak and pained. "Wait," I said, not wanting to hang up. "Can't you give me some idea about what's going on?" "No," he answered abruptly and hung up the phone. At first I was furious with him for leaving me with such a burden of uncertainty and concern, but this feeling poorly disguised the fear I felt in the very pit of my being. I knew Charlie was in serious trouble. I was certain of that. After I disembarked from the airplane, I looked for my brother. I could not see him at first. Then I saw a thin and gaunt figure walking towards me. I did not recognize him as my brother until he was quite close. He was the faintest shadow of the man that I once knew. His complexion was ashen. His eyes seemed sunken in deep wells below his eyebrows. The bones of his face seemed to almost peek through the outer layers of his skin. He attempted a smile, but only a hint of good humor settled in his expression. Seeing him like that made me feel terribly disconcerted. I tried desperately not to show my alarm at his condition. "Charlie," I called out. We shook hands. As we did, I could feel his body trembling. I wanted to ask him what the problem was, but I knew better. I needed to wait for a more suitable moment. As he drove me to his house from the airport, we spent those long moments in idle small talk and attempted to fill each other in regarding the substance of our lives. Charlie lived in a very poor part of town where the most profitable businesses were the liquor store, grocery, and betting parlor. The stairs up to his tenement were poorly maintained and led up to the front door that had a broken lock and shattered glass. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a 6th-floor walk-up. He had to stop and rest a number of times on the stairs before we finally arrived. His flat was small, even for a single person. His furnishings were modest. He was so weak that he immediately slumped onto his living room couch. At first, I thought it was rather rude for him not to offer me any food or refreshment. I was soon to learn, however, just how petty a thought that was. He motioned to a nearby chair, an old black mock leather lounging chair. I sat down. For the longest time, we just looked at each other and both of us felt extremely awkward. Finally, Charlie broke the silence. "David," he said, "I've got something to tell you. I hope you can understand. I need your help. I've got AIDS. At that moment, the entire world seemed to drop away from me. A coldness inundated my body from the inside. All the blood seemed to have left my head in a vain attempt to soothe the aching in my most inner self. At first, my eyes diverted themselves from his gaze. I could not look at him. When I did finally look into his eyes, I could see clearly what I had avoided noticing just moments ago. It was the shadow of death that was stalking my brother. It was death that was taking hold of him and that made his complexion glow with an almost iridescent pallor. My brother was dying. I could not help myself. I began to cry with such intensity that my whole body shook. I did not want to break down in front of him. I wanted to be strong and supportive, but the weight of his words fell heavily on me. I was powerless against this crushing reality. I put my face in my hands. Charlie came over to me and put his arms around me to offer me comfort. My body tensed, and I pulled away from him with an instinctive determination to protect myself. I am still painfully ashamed of that moment, even though it happened long ago. Charlie returned to the couch. He was both furious with me and terribly disheartened. A heavy silence filled the space between us. "Charlie," I said abruptly as I stood up, "I have to go." I left him there in such a disturbed state of mind. I walked the streets for hours, my mind in such turmoil that I could not grasp a single thought and hold on to it. The idea that my brother was dying, the idea that he was probably gay, was almost too much to accommodate. Moreover, I thought that if I had been more in touch with him, I may have been able to help him before his life had reached this horrible place. Reason had given way to a chaotic deluge of emotions that needed to run their course. I felt at various moments extreme anger, guilt, worry, and compassion. The night air and the rhythm of walking, however, eventually had a calming effect upon my unsettled mind. Once the extreme feelings had subsided, I began to grasp the reality for what it was. I began to see the situation with greater rationality and balance. I knew that the problem would not go away and that Charlie needed me. I felt ashamed of myself. I was not the one with AIDS. I was not the one whose life was curtailed and dominated by such daunting prospects for the future. I was not the one left to experience the loneliness and the stigma of such a dreaded disease. I was his brother. I was responsible for him now more than ever. I felt so disgusted with myself that I did not know whether I could go back and face him. I did not know whether I had the courage to do so. I could not ignore, however, his cries for help and ever hope to live peacefully with myself again. I returned some time later with a bag of groceries. It was my peace offering. "May I come in?" I asked. He did not answer, but simply stepped aside, allowing me to pass. I put the groceries on the kitchen table. He looked at me with steely eyes. He had an expression of pathos and disgust on his face that I will never forget. For long moments, we were both without words. It was as if we were looking at each other for the first time without the benefit of masks. I could not stand the distance between us any longer. I threw my arms around him and held him to me. I felt the fluttering of his weak heart. At first, he stood there limp and unresponsive. He was testing my resolve. I would not relent. Suddenly, his arms rose from his sides and he embraced me. I could feel the desperation and the relief. Finally, we backed away from each other. Both our eyes were filled with tears. I must say, that I don't believe I have ever felt that kind of joy either before or since. He looked at me, his eyes still glistening with tears. Do you know what you're in for? He asked. I nodded. Whenever I visit his grave, I feel the pain of losing him and the anger associated with a culture that responds so niggardly to such a hideous disease. Mostly, I think of the wondrous moment when our hearts and minds were one. The end. Thank you for listening. Until next time.